Good evening, everyone. My name is Hugh Brady, and I'm the Vice-Chancellor of the University of Bristol. You're very welcome. Welcome to the Wills Memorial Building. This is the fourth annual Mayor's Lecture, and it's been a great pleasure and an honour for the University to have hosted them to date. The University greatly values its partnership with the City and its institutions, a partnership which goes well beyond education and research through to innovation, the arts, sport, and so many other walks of life. I hope you have a wonderful evening. A special welcome to our Mayor, Marvin Rees, and his family who've joined us this evening. And it's up to me now just to hand over to Andrew Kelly, the Director of Bristol Festival of Ideas and of the Bristol Cultural Development Partnership, who will chair the session. Andrew.
Thank you very much, Hugh, and thank you again to the University of Bristol for hosting our fourth annual Mayor's Lecture. It's always a great pleasure to be here for this event. The way the evening is going to go tonight is we're going to have a short introduction to Marvin, and then Miles Chambers, a poet, will read his special poem about Bristol, and then Marvin will deliver his State of the City address, and then we're going to have a discussion using the questions that were sent in by the many people who have booked but some couldn't be here tonight, but asked us to see if we could ask these questions. We had over 70 questions in all, so we've joined a number together. We won't be able to get through them all, but we'll get through as many as possible. And I'll introduce the panel that we have to respond to Marvin and to discuss these things with him later on. But to welcome Marvin and to hear a bit more about him, would you welcome the Reverend David Geel? Thank you.
I'm very honoured to have been invited here this evening by my good friend Marvin Rees, who's now deservedly the Mayor of Bristol. Absolutely. I've known Marvin for almost 20 years, and let me tell you, if you don't know him, he's one of those really, really annoying people. He's handsome, he's clever, and he's good at sport. You know the type that I mean. But I'd say Marvin's greatest strength is his passion for justice, and justice for all people and of all backgrounds. I first met Marvin, we played football on the Downs for a church team, and it became fairly evident that Marvin wasn't really used to playing football. He was more of a rugby man, and he would just run through people. I think he's far more suited to politics, probably. As we can see, that Bristol is a city of opportunity. But there are still inequalities. There are still people that don't have the things that they should. I have lived in this city my whole life, and I grew up on a council estate. I've been in trouble with the law, and I've been excluded from various parts of society. For instance, this is the first time in my life that I've ever been in this building. This is Bristol. We are Bristol. And together, we need to change Bristol. I've been very fortunate that people have taken a punt on me, taken a chance. I hope that with Marvin at our lead, that we'll be able to take a punt on a lot more people that have not been to university, although that is not a bad thing. My wife is an academic, and before I get her into trouble, and actually works for this university. But people who have learned different skills, maybe not at school. I worked as a prison chaplain for 10 years, and I have seen the most remarkable, ingenious contraptions and inventions in that prison. On a lockdown, you would see the boys, they would make like little things from paper to be able to pass tobacco from one door to 20 doors down that way. and it would go in one door and out the next, in one door and out the next. It was ingenious, and you just think, we need to tap into this ingenuity. It's incredible. The guys on my estate have been failed by lots of different organisations and society. But with the help of Marvin and various other people that I won't name, I don't want to embarrass them, but we're starting to try and help them with setting up small businesses. So these lads that have had no education, been in trouble with the law, can earn, can learn, can do things for themselves, provide for their families. As I've already said, Marvin is a good guy. He's one of us. But he can't do it on his own. He needs all of us, from all backgrounds, from all shapes, colours, whatever. We are Bristol, so we need to support him and the council. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David. Would you now welcome Bristol poet Miles Chambers?
Wow, there's a lot of people here. You know, I said this at Marvin's inauguration, and I'll say it today. It is very rare to witness history, and even rarer to be a part of it. And Marvin becoming, we keep saying it, the first black mayor is significant for Bristol, for part of the memory of its racial history, but also just as a person he is as a mayor. And I know what you're thinking, maybe he was going to be playing reggae music in the council buildings, or serving curry goat and rice in the council canteen, or playing dominoes late at night. But no, he's got far more important things to do. And I've got a poem about Bristol. Bristol, Bristol, the city that was built on the bricks of heroic hardship. Bristol, Bristol, the place of dreams, the place of possibilities, the place of creative aspirations, culture, commerce, and its own seductive music. Bristol, Bristol, the city still haunted by the ancestral ghost that echoes the historical hangover that gets sobered us up to what time hasn't changed. Bristol, Bristol, take a walk, be inspired, feel the magical connection, see a positive future, come dance in this festival of ideas. See, we don't have to wait for carnival every year. You see, the party is right now, right here. This very stage, this very atmosphere is encouraging us to lose our fear, because geographically there's no go areas around here. Stand on the suspension bridge. See communities within a community, integrated and not segregated, and in the distance you can almost reach out and grab Glastonbury. Oh, city of paradoxes! Why all this controversy? Oh, conflicting, urbanization! I love you, but what are you doing to me? Amidst the beauty, I regularly see the women of the street being exploited by their sexuality, being exploited in their calamity. I love you, Bristol. I love the clamour of the weekend drinkers and the hustle and the bustle of the 9 to 5. I hate you, Bristol, as I watch every day the young kiddie in the Tesco shop doorway with the old weathered face clinging to his blanket of security, begging to survive. I love you because of my first kiss from Samantha. Because of the smell of Pyminster, because of the aroma of Agnes Spencer, because of the pool of colourful air balloons floating aimlessly in a blue sky. I love you because of the first play I wrote here, because of the first film we shot here, because of the first poem I performed here, which left inspired listeners with one notion: just try. I question the graffiti that glares at you, echoing the voices of imprisoned youth. And I hear a different cheer on a Saturday morning, the screams of Rover and City fans, echoing a different truth. I belong here, amidst the riots and the protests, amidst the fights for equality. I belong here amidst the ranters and the ravers and the gospel singers and the multicultural students studying effectively. I belong here with the Bristol blue taxis and the Cheers Drive shirt and jeans top blokes, braving the winter streets, trying to look cool. I belong here with the scanty clad beautified stiletto brigade, wearing the same skirts they used to wear to school. I belong here amidst the privileged pupils parading their privileged uniform and the underprivileged not being given the privilege to perform. I belong here amidst the movie makers and the animators. You taught me to see the magic in this storm. I belong here amidst the travelers and the hippies that asked me to think about life in a different way. I belong here amidst those that come here to work and to study and exclaim, I've just got to stay. I belong here amidst the big business and entrepreneurs and the old money, wheeling and dealing and trying to own this city. I belong here amidst those food-crazed ideas, animating that food craze, what's his name? Jamie. I belong here with the Bristol sound telling me who I am, echoing through my ears. I belong here with those faith-braced streets, trying to get me to come to God with all my fears. Oh, city of paradoxes, what are you going to show me today? Oh, conflicting urbanization, are you going to show me a better way? Transport and punctuality, drugs and social policy, religion and ethnicity, multiculturalism and unity, education and opportunity, business and creativity, media and honesty, religion and spirituality, acknowledgement and generosity. I belong here where the good schools are offering a good future to a bad past and the bad schools are offering a bad future to a good past. It's here on these streets that the youth are spitting the lyrics of the future that will change the wrong decisions of the past. Right now, in this place, we have the opportunity to do something great, to do something amazing together, to utilize the collective potential of us all and to make this place unique and special. Let's answer the call. I belong right here.
Thank you very much, Miles. We, in discussions with the Mayor, we wanted to call tonight's lecture A City for All, and Miles has introduced that perfectly. Would you now welcome Mayor Marvin Rees?
Yeah. Miles was right, there are a lot of people here. So and I don't even know how I follow that. I think his poem really captures so much of my heart for Bristol and why I got involved in politics and why before that I was involved in journalism and our community voluntary sector. So I just want to thank you and to let you all know that it's very fitting because today's National Poetry Day and we're just announcing Miles today as our first city poet. Yeah. So Miles will be popping up over the year to come, and I'm sure if you want to book him for something. But it was about his poems, but it's also about inspiring the city to be involved in telling the story, expressing the spirit of Bristol over the year to come. And I think it's going to be amazing. And then coming to the next year, we'll obviously be looking for someone else, so put your thinking caps on. I want to thank Dave as well for speaking. I have an incredible amount of respect for Dave. I would just say he's just a man of incredible integrity who's given his life to work with some of the most vulnerable and marginalized people, not just from this city, because when he was at the prison, they were coming from all over. And I went up to the prison and spent the odd day up there with some of the young people, and it was amazing to see young people from all backgrounds have a genuine sense of respect towards him and know that no matter what was going on in their lives, the hardships and the challenges they were overcoming, here was someone they could trust who had their interests at heart. So thank you for Dave for all you've done and continue to do, and thanks for your words today. Thank you very much. And thank you to the University of Bristol as well for hosting this, Hugh. It's amazing, and with Andrew, I would say as well, and everyone that organises this, to lock this down. The Festival of Ideas is an incredible offer to Bristol. If I'm going to name drop now, I actually just wrote to the Mayor of New York this morning, invited him over to speak next year, Bill de Blasio. But this is an incredible offer, both an intellectual and a cultural offer to Bristol and to the rest of the country. And it's incredible to have worked it up and to have this partnership with the university who host this event every year as well. So thank you. And I just have to say, my mum and my wife in the front, who would have thought me being here, Mum? Right? So when we were knocking around St. Paul's all those years ago. So thank you for everything done, and my in-laws here as well. Welcome from the US. My wife is an immigrant. She's from the United States. I have to register now, What with the new government policy, taking British jobs. Yeah, and thank you all for being here as well, giving up your evening. So I'm 5 months in. That's 151 days, and people do ask me very often, almost daily actually, what it's like. And I have to say my first reaction is that I love it. It is a challenge. I met Michael Berkowitz when I was in New York just over a month ago or so, and he worked in Mayor Bloomberg's administration. And he said to me, "Your first year, it's like having your mouth around a fire hydrant, and stuff just comes." I met a black mayor, an African-American mayor, just recently, and he said to me, and we were talking about our children, and he said it takes about 1.5 years to get on top of this stuff and to really begin to make space for your family life. And I hope we can do it faster than that. But just to say, it's busy, it's incredibly enjoyable, it's meaningful, but it is full on. Now, I came in with a lot of commitments, and decisions do come thick and fast. To date, as we reviewed, we've appointed a cross-party cabinet. We've launched a budget simulator, which I hope some of you have had a go on. We've successfully negotiated a devolution deal 1. We've launched a council-led review of residents' parking zones. We've frozen the cost of parking permits in RPZs until 2020. We've stopped enforcement action being taken against blue badge holders. We've launched a commission on the gender and race pay gap. We've commissioned a review of the 2016 elections. We've revived plans to build a recycling centre in Hartcliffe Way. We've launched a review into and developed a plan for housing priority for domestic abuse survivors. We've invested in the Colston Hall, Old Vic and St George's to allow them to secure their funds, to secure their futures as centres of culture. We've established a Brexit working group. We visited Brussels, or I visited Brussels with a small team to meet with EU commissioners and try to rescue Bristol's relationship with our EU partners. We've approved a major infrastructure project to build a heat network across Bristol, and it's been busy. As around all that, I've still had to go and visit my nan, where she is. But this is my second speech in as many weeks. Last week I spoke at the Labour conference, and I talked of the challenge facing Bristol and the shift in power and responsibility from Westminster to city government that is needed. The challenge is this, that for all intents and purposes, as we've heard tonight, we are a thriving city. From Brunel to Concord to Ardman to Banksy to our 450 parks and green spaces, we are a source of knowledge, innovation, and quality of life. We're an ambitious city with 2 world-class universities and one of the highest graduate retention rates in the country. The West of England as a whole is the UK's most economically productive region. The total value of goods and services produced in the area per person is the highest outside of London. Now, whilst this is all true, and we have a great story to tell, this is a prosperity in which too many people in the city simply do not share. Around 25% of our children grow up in poverty. You can walk from Henleys to Southmead in the north of our city, and the life expectancy of people born in those areas is divided by 9 years. If you're born in Hartcliffe in the south or Lawrence Hill in the centre, you're as unlikely to go to university as those in wealthier areas are as likely to go to university. We are a city, if we face up to it, that is great, but is fractured by by race and class. This challenge is not unique to Bristol. Cities all over the world are facing the problem of how to develop in a way that is both socially and environmentally just and sustainable. So this is about our determination to take control of our future. This whole evening, this whole speech, the aspirations we set out are tied to our ability to get the powers we need to get things done. This speech is given within that context. And that is the need for governance to catch up with both the trend and the needs of cities in a post-national world. Power must shift from London to cities to enable them to determine their own future. Cities must have the power they need to make local institutions locally accountable, to organize local institutions to deliver local rather than national strategies. The introduction of mayors, devolution, and the need to strengthen democracy by bringing power closer to people are drivers for this shift. Through developing a closer relationship with the core cities and with London, we will be able to change our relationship with the government. We will be clearer on city needs, on the strong call for city powers, and develop stronger city governance. There's also a crucial need to engage with the government's own direction of travel, to understand their priorities and deliver as cities that are key drivers of the country's economy. We aren't just asking for money, but we must secure the resources we need to be able to offer ourselves up as the solution, not as a problem. Now, the fault lines of national political debate do not fit neatly onto the local political landscape. Now, of course, there are legitimate political differences. I am Labour for a reason. But at some fundamental level, close to the coalface, with limited resource, in the face of powerful national and international forces, at the local level, we simply must hustle to get things done. Now, I'm not asking government for all the powers in one go. I think we have to show our ability to lead a joined-up city and region, and we, in some sense, have to grow into powers, earn the right to ask for those powers. So to that end, I've launched the City Office with support from the universities, from my emergency services, from business, trades unions, the public, private, and voluntary sectors. The City Office brings together the powers that have huge footprints in the city, coming together to agree the city's priorities, manage and deliver them together. None of us can do it alone. But if all of us, all the big players in Bristol, in the room, decide to take on a challenge, if we have the will, then we have the combined resources and the collective strength to deliver the kind of Bristol we want. Now, we've launched, from within the City Office, initial task and finish projects. One around street homelessness, and the other around providing quality work experience for all young people. But ultimately, a key challenge for the City Office, for me, for partners, for all our citizens, is to finalise a single One Bristol plan. A plan that draws up, plots out, and builds the city we want to live, grow, and work in. This must be an integrated plan that brings the city together, and everyone knows their part in delivery. Not everything can be achieved in 4 years, and the plan must take us up to 50 years into the future with clear milestones and deliverables. So I invite the city to stand with me, because only together will we define the challenges and the opportunities that face both the city and our city partners. Tonight, I'll lay out those challenges and my direction of travel. Now, we have to face up to the fact that nobody has all the answers, resources, or levers to get us there. So tonight, I issue a challenge to you all, as we've heard already this evening, to the whole city, to find the answers with me. Now, having said that, I have a mandate to set out the direction of travel. Now, key to that mandate is my commitment to reducing inequality. Inequality is a moral problem for the city. It simply cannot be right that in such a prosperous city, we have 42 areas listed among the top 10% most deprived in England. That's 69,000 of our residents living in the most deprived areas, including 18,000 children and 11,000 older people. But tackling inequality is also the aspirational thing to do because it makes economic sense. In their book, The Spirit Level, Wilson and Pickett argue that we've reached the end of what economic growth alone can do for us as a policy tool. They highlight the pernicious effects that inequality has on societies, eroding trust, increasing anxiety and illness, and encouraging excessive consumption. They show that for each of 11 different health and social problems, physical health, mental health, drug abuse, education, imprisonment, obesity, social mobility, trust and community life and violence, teenage pregnancies and child well-being, the outcomes are significantly worse in more unequal societies. These social features do not only rob us of talent, but they also cost us money in terms of the services we have to provide to deal with the consequences of these social ills. If we take their argument seriously, and I do, our fundamental challenge is that while Bristol is getting wealthier, inequality is increasing, and the city becoming ever more unaffordable. The Joseph Rowntree Foundation recently concluded the poorest areas of towns and cities do not always benefit from economic growth. They can remain disconnected from the prosperity experienced by residents of wealthier neighborhoods in the same region. This means the primary question for us is how to do economic development in a way that reduces inequality and improves affordability in the city. The success of our city cannot be measured by growth alone, but by the way we do that growth. So I set out my priorities in areas that are foundations for tackling inequality: to build homes, to improve transport, and to give children a better start in life. We started work on these priorities already. Housing plays a key role in growth, and if we're intentional, can deliver inclusive growth. I've pledged to build 2,000 homes a year by 2020, including at least 800 affordable homes. But we're not just building houses, we're building homes. Not just homes, we're building communities. We're taking a definite approach to reversing this specific tanker and tackling the clear crisis on housing in Bristol. The crisis is reversible, but only with immediate and decisive actions. We've stopped land being sold off, bringing back resources to the city. 20 homes that were for sale are now housing homeless families. More are being repaired and readied for the same purpose. Sites that were up for sale are now taken back, and 1,700 new homes will be built on them. On one of those sites, we will do what was considered unthinkable and build 60 council-owned homes. I'm grateful that our housing associations are joining with us and committing even more investment than before. We will encourage community-based and cooperative housing projects across the city. We're creating our own housing delivery company to bring forward development of council-owned land. Affordable housing is also an element in the tough challenge to ensure gentrification does not inexorably change the look and feel of our city and reduce its diversity. There are no easy solutions to this challenge, but developing brownfield sites for affordable homes is an important step. I've announced a commission to tackle the adverse impact of gentrification. Stable homes and communities are essential for our children to get off to a better start in life. Mental health is a priority commitment for me. During my campaign, I met with young people from the Mentality Project, hosted by Off the Record. I asked them what was the single most important intervention we as a city could make for young people, children and young people's mental health. They said to me, mental health intervention at primary age. Now, we've mapped out all the mental health work carried out in the city for primary age, and I will ask the Mental Health and Wellbeing Board, Learning City Partnership, and all Bristol primary schools to work with me to make sure we live up to the challenge delivered by those young people and begin investing in the mental health and well-being and resilience of our children. And our teachers are reporting increasing numbers of young people turning up to school hungry, unable to concentrate and learn. I want to work with the city to ensure every child has access to a breakfast club, to ensure they get off to a good start in their day. Again, we're mapping schools that do and don't provide breakfast clubs, and I'll ask all schools what they need from me and the city to make that provision possible. To that end, we've written to parents to maximise registration for the pupil premium that will go some way to covering the costs. And we've committed to protecting children's centres in very difficult financial times. That is going to be a challenge. As you'll hear later, our finances are challenged, to put it mildly, but it's a commitment we've made to support families and young people across the city. Building communities where good housing, education, and health intervention is effective builds happy cities and secure families, translating into a healthy workforce and lower demand on public services. For many of our less wealthy citizens, for many of our working people, their fortunes are essentially linked to the local labour market. Linking people to jobs, wealth, and to urban economic growth means connectivity is crucial. Transport in Bristol is a challenge, and we're yet to find the solution. Our buses, our taxis, and all our road users struggle with congestion, and our transport network has frighteningly low resilience. Congestion impacts on air quality, on work-life balance, on productivity, and, yes, on inclusive growth. All of our road users should want and demand a better experience. Indeed, most do demand it loudly, and we hear it. There's no simple solution. As an American city planner once said, solving congestion by adding more lanes to roads is like tackling obesity by loosening your belt. But we need a fresh look at our congestion. And I'm announcing tonight we will launch a task group to look at solutions to our city's congestion and transport flow. We must be determined to link our city, our physical city, to our economic city. We must connect people to people and people to opportunities. I want to work with our transport partners to improve air quality in the city and to ensure transport delivers in a sustainable way. And I announce tonight, I aim to deliver Bristol a whole clean fleet, a clean energy fleet of buses. Initially, I want to collaborate on this aspiration with our bus providers, and I know First share that interest. I have the same aim for taxi drivers, but that must be done recognizing how we haven't always helped these local entrepreneurs and without doing them financial harm. A successful city needs an effective transport system that helps towards our carbon targets and drives our economy. Turning to the structure of our local economy, we should be proud of our growing high-tech industry and embrace our creative sector. But we must be intentional about structuring our economy to ensure there is opportunity for all. Simply put, if we don't acknowledge that there also has to be emphasis on employment sectors that can deliver sustainable, decent jobs that benefit households in our poorer areas and improve the quality and sustainability of lower skilled work, then we will start to fail on our promise to reduce inequality, and we will build people out of the local economy, and we'll promote greater disconnectedness in an already fractured city. Along with sustainable development, structuring Bristol's economy to work for all is a challenge that will go to the very heart of the local Bristol plan. And we need a new kind of investment in Bristol that's connected to social outcomes and not just returning dividends to shareholders. Today, I'm announcing the launch of a strategic partnership with the not-for-profit community interest company, Bristol and Bath Regional Capital. As part of our economic development activity, we co-created BBRC alongside our universities, business and community groups to channel ethically motivated investment into community-led projects. In its first year, BBRC has already delivered £1 million of investment into sports in South Bristol. We'll now build on this success by working with BBRC to retain and attract investment at scale into our housing, employment, and other city priorities. As part of its future role, we see BBRC as a mechanism to mobilize local money for local priorities. We'll also work with them as part of the City Office to identify and access the right type of investment to fund the 40 and 50-year ambitions identified in our emerging city plan. In looking at inequality, we must also look at the issue of leadership. By bringing a greater diversity of thought into the city's leadership, we will, by definition, unlock new ways of thinking about the old intractable challenges. We started this with our cabinet and a talent development scheme in the local authority that we want to roll out across the city. We will ask our partners to work with us to be intentional about developing the kind of diverse leadership pool, talent pool the city needs. We know too that we must get hold of planning as a key tool for the city. Last week I came to work at City Hall and was met outside by a demonstration against the biodiesel-powered generators. This came as a surprise because only a few months ago I was campaigning against them myself in my election. I asked for an update and found that we were recommending them to the planning committee. I asked on what basis. It's our policy. Whose policy, I asked? Because it's not mine and I'm the mayor. That's one of the first real entries into the weird and wonderful world of planning in Bristol, one that sits above all of us, our managers and our elected politicians, that we must get a hold of. There are local and national policies to consider, but my first port of call is to overhaul the local policies to make sure it delivers for Bristol. Now, this sounds like red tape, but it's become clear to me this is how you start to draw your own picture of the city. And on planning, and by the way, I want Bristol's skyline to grow. Years of low-level buildings and a reluctance to build up in an already congested city is a policy I'm keen to change. Tall buildings built in the right way, in the right places and for the right reasons communicate ambition and energy. And of course, we must deliver on the arena. Now, this presents challenges, and we intend to deliver. But let me be clear, we will deliver, but it must be cost effective. A few weeks after I was elected, the country decided to leave the EU. Post-Brexit, we need to be proactive and clear about our international strategy, about taking on the challenge and finding where new opportunities lie. Think about what older relationships are nice, but don't produce future economic benefit for Bristol. We're taking this approach to our core city partners to see how we, as a collective, can work together to present ourselves on the international stage, irrespective of whether central government is successful in taking the steps or sending out the mood music to the world, that we remain open for business. We are an international city in a world facing the largest migration crisis since the Second World War. So I want to take tonight as an opportunity to make explicit my determination to keep and honor our title as a city of sanctuary. Brexit has had a real impact on our city. One of those impacts has been the increase in hate crime and hostility to perceived outsiders. In the lead up to this event tonight, I received a question from Katerina, aged 9. She simply asked, I am an EU migrant and a Bristol resident. What will happen to me and my mum? And how will you protect us? So I say to Katerina and others with similar concerns, you are welcome in Bristol, and we will take seriously and act against any incidents of hate crime. Many people in Bristol have come here as a result of economic migration, and they have come here to work and earn and to contribute to Bristol's economy, and they must be respected. I am keen for myself and other politicians to meet with EU and other international community groups to further our understanding of their concerns and our connectivity to their lives. One of the unusual impacts of Brexit could be that it works against our city and other cities' interests. You see, the whole Brexit argument was built on the idea of empowering national government and was totally silent on regional and city government. Cities need open borders in a post-national world, and yet Brexit sets national government as another hoop for us to jump through. In that sense, ironically, Brexit does not liberate, it centralizes power, moving sovereignty away from the local level into national government hands. I've written to David Davis, and with the core cities, we will do our best to shape Brexit, to minimize the harm it could do to our development, and we will take that message to government. Now, a big part of our international reach is our cultural offer. Now, we're rightly proud of our cultural offer in the city. Our cultural impact exceeds our expenditure, and Bristol has a reputation that brings Bristol to the city. Our initial commitment to launch a bid to become a European capital of culture has been undermined by the Brexit vote. Nevertheless, we can continue to prioritize our cultural offer, but this must be an offer that is inclusive, one that doesn't only celebrate the city centre. In sport, Bristol has punched below its weight, and I'm determined to increase activity, participation, access, and elite sport in the city. And I can share tonight that we are in discussions to bring powerboat racing back to the city's docks. It's true. Now, I focus tonight on the state of the city, not the state of the city council. But I need to share with you that we, as a city council, have inherited huge financial pressures. The budget for the city council is challenging, and we are facing decisions now to make in-year savings of around £33 million, and facing a budget gap of at least £90 million by March 2022. Inevitably, the decisions we have to make to set a legal budget will be painful for the city and for our partners. But we have a financial envelope imposed on us by central government that we have to operate within. However, it must be said that I'm not happy with how we got here. So I've launched an independent review to be carried out by Dr. Steve Bundred of the Local Government Association to identify how we got to where we are and to learn the lessons, ensuring a resilient process for the future and putting in place best financial practices. This time next week, we will launch a consultation on our 5-year plan for the city, including its finances, and we want your views on our options and our priorities. In summary, city government is the coming power. But it will only be truly effective if central government allows us the financial and legislative resources we need to deliver for Bristol and contribute to national solutions. Bristol is a great but complex city. I've lived and worked across the best and the worst of it. It was a place where, as a young black mixed-race teenager, I couldn't get a job in Broadmead because I was a young mixed-race black teenager. But it's also the city that elected me to be its mayor. I relish that complexity, and I'd say that we should neither fear it nor hide from it. If we want to enjoy our beauty, to be inspired by our innovation, to engage in our prosperity, and to celebrate our culture, then we have a price to pay, a responsibility to actually deliver our inclusivity. All of us, the whole city, has a duty to lead a city for all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marvin. As I said, we had 70 questions submitted in advance of tonight's meeting, and we've invited a small panel to both respond to Marvin's lecture and also to join him in the discussion answering some of these questions. On the far left, Gavin Kelly, Chief Executive of the Resolution Trust, writer, commentator on social mobility, low pay. He's also chairman of the Low Pay Commission and has written also on intergenerational issues. And next to Gavin is Alexandra Jones, the Chief Executive Officer of Centre for Cities, and has looked at a number of areas, most recently particularly the changing economies of cities and devolution in particular. And we're going to be exploring some of these issues in discussion with Marvin, as I said. But first of all, I wanted to just ask both of our guest speakers to respond a little bit to what Marvin has said. And I think it's Alexandra who's going first. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And it's a real pleasure to be here. I really enjoyed your speech, Marvin, and I think what you've outlined is very much what we at the Centre for Cities understand about Bristol. And Centre for Cities, we're a think tank, we're independent, non-partisan. We look at cities around the UK and around the world and look at how they do in terms of their economies. How are they growing? What are their jobs like? How are they succeeding? And where are they really facing challenges? And I think what you've described and what we see in Bristol is it is a successful place. In many, many ways, it's a really successful place that faces all the challenges of being a successful place. And actually the challenges of needing to maintain some of that success. There's no guarantee because you've been successful in the past, you will be in the future. But I think there's also big questions that you've raised and that we would raise about whether the success you have now is really good enough in the first place, given some of the things that you have and the potential you've got. In terms of that success, so if you look at the things that make cities successful around the world, Bristol does really well on all kinds of the measures. So for example, in this country, you're the 5th out of the 63 cities we look at for jobs in the knowledge-intensive industries. So Bristol has huge diversity in this. You've got financial services, creative industries, one of the best tech clusters. So huge numbers of jobs, and they're the fastest-growing jobs, they're the fastest-growing sectors, they deliver productivity. You've got universities, you've got relatively high levels of skills, you've got great culture, you've got lots of startups. So on lots of the measures that we look at that make cities successful, you're doing really well. You've got lots of the things that are important. And because of that, and you do well, you do very well compared to many of the other core cities. You're one of the few places outside London of the big cities that performs above national average on some of the measures that count for the economy, like jobs, like employment. So you face the challenges of being successful. You are not good enough at providing housing that's affordable for enough people. You're the 10th least good in the country. And there are places of Oxford and London are slightly worse, but 10th is something you really need to work on because that's just an average. That doesn't include all the people affected by that. Congestion. Getting around this city is very hard indeed. You've got a lot of people who do walking and cycling. That's better than some other cities. You've got far too few people compared to other cities using public transport. And I know from my experience, from knowing people in Bristol and businesses, it's because it's really hard getting around. And often somebody was saying to me they wouldn't get the bus because it's far quicker to walk past it down the hill as they get to work. So big challenges on congestion, on broadband, on some of those digital infrastructure, on skills, because the average figures cover an awful lot of problems on skills and on schools. And I know Gavin's going to talk about that as well. And actually making a place work is about pulling everything together. It's about building new houses that have got the transport and have got the places, and it's all the communities you were talking about, Marvin. And I think that's one of the big challenges that faces successful places. How do you expand? How do you do that in a way that really works for the city and for everybody in it? Because like many successful places, a lot of people in the city just don't benefit from that success. I think you also can't assume future success, and you touched on this. Brexit will raise real challenges on financial services, on talent, on having access to investment. There may well be huge opportunities as well, but making the most of those and not assuming because you've been good in the past, you'll be good in the future is key. There's a real risk, as you've said, that actually decisions will continue to be made in Whitehall rather than here. Whitehall doesn't know what buses are needed, where housing is needed, and what the challenges are that people face in local communities. You know that. But they're very keen to keep their hands on all the powers and particularly all the money. And unless you do more to tackle that, and that's, I think, as you were saying, not just about the powers you've got now, but using the soft powers, your ability to talk to people, convene people, and shout loudly in the country about getting more powers, that will be part of what helps to try and make that difference. And as I said, I think you do very well. You've got lots of the challenges that are associated with doing very well, But actually, you're not quite as good as I think you could be, given all of those things you've got, those jobs you've got, the history you've got, the skills you've got, the city you've got. It's a fabulous city. So you do need to do, I think, even more to make sure it's working, and that mix really works well together. And I think one of the key challenges for a city like this that has always done pretty well, that actually it's quite easy not to see some of the people who aren't benefiting, is complacency. And again, you touched on this. This is a city that I've been to and worked with and been in over many years. And there's a sense sometimes that it's going to be fine. You don't need to fix this. You don't need to do things. You don't need to drive things. You can just keep doing what you've always done because it's always been fine. And it's striking here where you don't get it in Greater Manchester because they've seen what the cliff edge of economic challenges are, and they have fought their way out, and they keep fighting. You don't have to keep fighting here, but I would argue actually when you look at some of the stats beneath it, you do need to. You need to keep moving on. Making the most of devolution, building that leadership, recognising and tackling complacency. You have a lot of great things here to build on, but a lot of big challenges. And it's going to be a challenging few years ahead. So I think the agenda you've set out, a lot of the issues are ones we would point out. Bristol is doing well, but not well enough. And I think there's a lot you need to do to make sure it works for everybody, and it's working well in the years ahead.
Thank you very much, Alex. Thank you. Gavin.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you. What a remarkable event this is. Before I get into my remarks, I just want to start by saying I've been knocking around issues of low pay, inequality, social mobility, those sorts of debates in different cities around these aisles for quite a while. And it's a long time since I've heard a political leader put issues which I care about so profoundly, so front and centre of their agenda. And so I just massive credit to you for that. I'm going to come on to challenging in various ways. But there's a lot of leaders. A lot of leaders wouldn't have done that, and you've set your stall out, and it's lifted me. So thank you for that. What I'm going to sort of say, I think, is, and I suppose I would say this because I'm sat in front of, God knows, like 800 people or so from Bristol. But what happens in the city really matters. It matters to you for obvious reasons, but it matters to. I'm not from. I've come here a lot. I love it, but I'm not from Bristol, and it matters to the rest of us because I think we can learn a lot, a lot for good and some for ill. Why do I say that? I say it because there's a kind of, in the sort of debates that Alex and I and others knock about in, there's a sort of view of a recipe, if you like, for what makes for a successful post-industrial 21st century city. And you've got most of it. You've got a lot of what you're supposed to have. The ingredients are there. You've got this big pool of high-skilled workers. You've got these very successful cities that are recognised around the world. Might have bad transport links within the city, but you can get to other places. You've got an airport, and you've got cool. Let's be honest. People want culture, and people want creative cities, and people look to Bristol for that. Other places want the stuff you've got, and so what happens here tells us something. And in a nutshell. It's a prosperous city and there's a lot right with it, and you've heard that from Alex and you've heard that from the mayor too, but you've got some really big challenges. So in terms of what's right about the city, more people work in the city than is average in the UK cities, a lot more. That's really, and there are many fewer workless households. Pay is a bit above the national average, and you have shed loads of graduates who you retain and loads that you gain from other places. People choose to come and build a life here. And lots of other people city leaders would give anything for that. That's kind of gold in the sort of the decades that we're in. So that's pretty good. So why do I feel a sense of unease when I look at, like I do, at the data on this city? Well, there's a number of things, but I'm going to just point to three because I know time is short and that the chair will cut me down. I'll start, and I really am amplifying in a way what you've heard, particularly from the mayor, which I agree with, but I want to sort of dial it up a notch in a way, not least because I want him to remember for when I come back and it will be a bit more difficult in a few years' time when we can all hang it around your neck and say, well, why hasn't it changed? But first of all, inequality. This city has got a massive problem with inequality. I mean, it's a burning problem of inequality in the city. I knew that before, but I've spent today as you would imagine, cluing up from Bristol. And God, my jaw dropped when I looked at some of it. In child poverty, there isn't a worse city in England in terms of the gap between wards in a city in terms of the percentage of kids who grow up in poverty. It's stunning. And that's actually not as bad as the educational inequality in this town. You know, just 1 in 4 poor kids on free school meals get what the standard benchmark of 5 good GCSEs, including English and maths. If you come to where I live now in London, it's over double that. Over 50% of kids in London, poor kids, hit the benchmark. That didn't used to be the case. We used to be worse. We used to be worse than Bristol. That's changed. It can change. When you look at London in terms of who goes to university, almost 50%, it's 44% in inner London of kids from the poorest backgrounds make it to university. Bristol, 13%. 13%. To be blunt, and I know there's no point not being, if you're being born poor in this country, in terms of your prospects, you wouldn't want to be born in this city today, in terms of your educational outcomes. That's not true for better off kids. I'm talking about poor kids. And that's a terrible thing to say. And I'm not telling anything, the mayor, I want to be clear about this, I'm not telling anything he doesn't know, and he's just had 100 days in office. But, you know, that is a big thing to shift, but it can be shifted. And low pay, I just want to say, I chair the Living Wage Commission, so I would say something on that. Bristol's better than some cities in low pay, but God, you know, it's 1 in 5 jobs in this city pay poverty wages, below the living wage. That's too many. Yes, far too many, and it can change. So inequality is a massive defining problem, and I know, my guess is a lot of people inside this hall tonight know that, but don't understate it. You know, that is hurting the city in a whole bunch of ways. The second one I want to touch on, and I'll be briefer, is productivity. Now, that's an odd one in a way for me to mention, because Bristol's historically been pretty good at productivity. And indeed, Marvin said that the South West performs a lot better than some other places in England, and that's true. But I worry about productivity, and it speaks to Alex's point about complacency in a way. So since the crash, Bristol has fallen, the city of Bristol has fallen significantly in terms of productivity. Other places haven't, they've just flatlined. Bristol's gone backwards. And the thing that's really odd, and it is your own kind of city productivity puzzle, I mean, you've basically got the graduate workforce of London. You're knocking right on the door of London, and that nowhere else in Britain is anything like London other than Bristol. So that is a really big thing. But you've got the productivity at a city level of Lincolnshire. And that's an odd mix to have. And if I was a business leader in this town, I'd be worried about how you're utilising skills, and as I think others have touched on, I'd be worried about the infrastructure within this city. Something isn't working as it should be in this city if you've got the productivity of Lincolnshire given the assets that you have around us, and that is a big deal. I'll move on to my third challenge, and I mean, you couldn't talk about the big challenges of the city of Bristol without talking about housing. And it is, I mean, you know, when someone from London is worried about how you're doing in housing affordability, you know you're in, you know you need to pause and think about it. House prices since the early 2000s have gone up by 255%. 255%, 50% since 2010. I would love to be able to report that wages have grown in a similar sort of pace. I can't. House prices have gone up 3 times faster than wages every year since the turn of the century, and that just can't go on. Something's going to give. You know, that's just. I mean, the human misery that creates for people not on the housing ladder we know about, and it's not like things are okay for renters. Things have got much worse. This is one of the worst places in England to live if you're a renter in terms of affordability. You're right up near the top, not at London levels, but outside London it's one of the worst places to live in terms of renting affordability. So there is a massive challenge on housing. Now, what does that, I haven't got time to go through my own mini manifesto, unfortunately, but you know, all those things are hard. None of them are insurmountable to move on with the right sort of coalition behind it. My pitch, as the mayor rightly thinks through his plan and he thinks through the coalitions he needs to build, is to aim even higher than you kind of minded to on all these. You know, if the attainment of poor kids doesn't rise and rise fast, then any fine words about social mobility are empty. You know, they're just not going to go anywhere. If you want to build an economy which works for all, that means building a living wage city. It really does. It means building into everything you do here and all your procurement and all the deals you do with different sectors about land use and so on, living wage jobs. That's doable. It's hard, but it's doable. And it means building homes. I've seen political leaders in other places waste political capital and waste time messing around with micro housing schemes, which kind of make things slightly more affordable and their pet projects. If you want to make a difference and sort of shift things in housing, you need to build homes, you need to grab land, and you need to build on them, and that's going to upset people, and that's what you should do. So that's my pitch.
Thank you, Gavin. I want to take a few of those things with Marvin, but also weave in some of the questions we had from members of the audience and the public who responded to us. The first is about culture change and about this issue about complacency. What are you doing? You've set up a city office. What impact do you think that will have on changing the culture of the city and the culture of the city council and so on?
Well, I think in two ways. So the basic premise is a couple of months ago, we pulled together, we had in a room on a day 70 to 75 city leaders from our universities, from business, voluntary sector, police, obviously local government. I mean, this is an incredible group of people. And I think the challenge that we shared, I got my office to do a back-of-the-envelope calculation. And the back-of-the-envelope calculation suggested that between us in that room, we spent £4 billion in Bristol. And between us in that room, we employed 50,000 people. So the challenge is, if we, in that room on that morning, decided to have an impact on Bristol, and we were going to rally the way we spent our money, the way we employed people, we could probably have that impact. And I think the challenge for us as a city that sometimes you take on is, we're having an impact on Bristol. Anyway, the impact we're having is that we are not rallying around shared priorities as a whole city. And there are fantastic partnerships in Bristol. The Learning City Partnership is a fantastic partnership. There are a number of fantastic partnerships. But in terms of that city, that overarching city narrative, that I think that's where the opportunity is. Now, we're going to have an impact because we don't get organised, or we're going to have an impact because we do. And I think maybe just creating space for that kind of realization will hopefully, bring people forward. And there are people from this university and around that we've been talking about this for 5 years, ever since I was director of our local strategic partnership, the real potential there is in bringing genuine coordination to the way we all work together. And I hope that will do something. I think the other thing I'll say about culture change is a point that I made just in passing, really, and it's about the diversity of thought. So Alan Milburn's report, if any of you have come across it, Elitist Britain, there's a real challenge in that report for us. And it says that the relationship between people's background, their economic background, and who ends up in leadership in Britain is so strong that it looks like social engineering. And he says, in fact, you have to ask the question, to what extent does our leadership reflect merit or people's background? Now, that has to land somewhere. And unless we're going to make the claim that Bristol is not subject to those problems, unless we're doing something radically different, that's landing in Bristol. So I think one of the things that we do about culture change is become very intentional about developing a broader, a more diverse leadership talent pool. Because I think by definition, when you've got people like Dave coming up and talking about the city, when you've got people coming from Hartcliffe and Avonmouth, and I'm not saying eliminating the Clifton, but sitting alongside, because it's the diversity of thought we want, not sweeping out existing thought. It's the diversity to challenge and not fall into easy assumptions of conformity. Then you will begin to get culture change, and you'll have the dynamism of thought around how we take on those intractable challenges. And those are two kind of real building blocks I'd really like to work on.
And thank you. And just before moving on to the second point, Alex, you work with cities all around the country. Are there the equivalent of city offices elsewhere, or is there kind of creative thinking going on like that?
I mean, there are lots of partnerships around the country where people are trying to do different things within the city. Greater Manchester is a good example. You've got lots of partnerships there with businesses, working with local government, working with the voluntary sector. I think what's interesting about what you're doing here, Marvin, is that a city office, that idea, that I haven't seen in quite that way. And I think what's good about what you're doing, and what I'd urge you to keep doing, is keep it specific. So rather than try and do everything, do some specific things. Measure what you're doing, and measure it publicly, not privately, not behind closed doors. Actually talk about those measures, and not making them just measures that geeky people like me look at, but things that the papers are talking about. Making sure in those teams, I think your point about the diversity of leadership, I think what's powerful is getting people to work together on projects. And you see this in the private sector, actually. So that's a good example, Tesco. whenever they're not the best example now perhaps, but they were leading the field a few years ago. And what they did do is when they were trying to do projects, they would bring people from the shop floor, from the storeroom, from head office, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, to work on something for 6 weeks. I know that's the kind of model you're pursuing. I think that's how you get it. Occasional workshops with different people doesn't get you that leadership. It doesn't get you the insight. It's kind of working together and making sure that team works there. So specific, measurable, and shouting about it, I think, because the problem with the city office, which I think is the exact right name for it, is it might sound to some like it's administrative, it's process. And actually, I think it's about more than that, which I think is what's exciting about what you've said. But talking about that and not forgetting that you have to say it a lot of times before the kind of person in the street really thinks about it.
And if I'm right in thinking, Marvin, you're targeting very closely. The first work of the city office is about homelessness, so it's targeting it on one particular issue.
Yeah, and our director's sitting over there. So he's making notes, I'm sure. So like we said, we think there is a need, and drawing on the work of Professor Robin Hambleton from UE and the stuff that's gone on in cities around the world, in New York, Chicago, where they have written the single plan for the place that looks at the interdependencies of all our different areas and so forth. So that's the golden. But going for that in the first instance is too abstract. So what came was an initial challenge from business, actually, from Matt Griffiths from Business West and Ed Robury from Bristol and Bath Regional Capital, was about focusing on street homelessness. So what if we as a city, and all those big city institutions spending all that money, employing all those people, said, we just don't want to see people sleeping on the streets, and we're going to mobilise to make sure that doesn't happen in Bristol. So street homelessness is one. Getting all young people access to good quality work experience was the second. Again, it's something that we can identify and contain. Now, interestingly, the head of Lee, the head of City of Bristol College, if I remember the number, said 56% of our young people in Bristol do not get access to the kind of work experience that gets them the jobs they want. 30-odd% of our young people don't know how to reach out to get work experience. And that's a major impact on social mobility, as well as the education attainment levels and their connectivity into the economy, the development of work habits, broadening the horizons and all those things. That's a city shame. But that is a challenge that the city as a city could take on. So we're trying to be very containable, but then while at the same time doing that more cerebral piece of work in the background, is an ongoing.
And very briefly on the metrics, you look at New York, you look at Baltimore, you look at these cities that have put together really interesting dashboards that help you think, if you're tackling homelessness, they help you think about some of the other things that might help you predict what might lead to homelessness, might help you join it up with some other aspects of the system. So in New York, they've got this kind of way of picking where fires are going to happen. They've got kind of, there's all sorts of ways, it's based on the quality of the buildings and all sorts of other things, but there's ways you can use some of the data that you've got and opening it up to people and getting them to help you when you're doing targeted things, actually see if you've got spin-offs to other things. But that data and learning from the best in the US, I think, could also be important for the city office.
Okay, then thank you for that. We want to follow up with a question, something that Gavin raised, and we had a number of questions about 0 hours contracts, about low pay, and about living wage city. Marvin, what's your position on living wage city and dealing with 0 hours contracts?
Well, we were just talking about it. We need it. Craig Cheney, we've put together this cabinet, as I said, and we've, it's a challenge, but we're allocating the tasks across our cabinet leads, and Craig Cheney's a fantastic man, is leading on that, the living wage. We want to pull together a partnership, and again, we want to do this in the city council, we want to do it through our contracts, but we would like there to be a kind of a city ethos around this, and we think poverty costs money. So it's not that if we don't do it, it's a shame. If we don't help people to escape poverty by their wages, it will cost us money elsewhere, somewhere else in the system.
Gavin.
Thank you. Well, you made that point perfectly for me, which is that it all comes out somewhere. If you don't pay people living wage, there's a cost somewhere else to be picked up by someone else, and if you're the mayor, then you're involved with someone else. There isn't a someone else. It will come back to you one way or another. So that's the right way of thinking. But I nobbled the mayor before we came in here because my pitch was I'd heard that Bristol was going to become a living wage employer, which is great, and we've now got 2,800 across the UK, which is fantastic. But my what I've learnt talking to lots of living wage employees is they broadly kind of fall into two categories. And one is the plaque on the wall, which is good. I mean, it's a lot better than not, and they meet the rules which we set out to become a living wage employer, and I'm not knocking that, and we want more people signing up of any sort, but there is a big difference between doing that and being out there, making the case to build the living wage beyond the confines of your own organisation. And there's lots of ways that people can do that, not least mayors. So, the mayor of a city can't really directly control what happens in hotels. It's really hard. Or restaurants, big low-pay sector. He can let it be known, and I've seen this happen, he can let it be known that if you're going to meet with the mayor, the first question you're going to get asked about something is, by the way, when you're becoming a living wage employer, and why haven't you done it? And what's happening? Next time I see you, I might not see you for a while if you don't move on it. And you can make life awkward for people, and you really can. And you have power through procurement, and I can give you the dry kind of ways in which mayors can influence things directly, but actually you have more power through using the office. And I've seen it time and time again. And, I'll credit to them, the Scottish Government are fantastic on this. I mean, Nicola Sturgeon is quite a scary person when she wants to be. And if you get in a room with her, and you're not paying, and Scotland's, she knows the big employers, you're not paying a living wage, she's onto you. She'll call it out. And it makes a difference. And so, yes, have the plaque on the wall and be proud of it, but go beyond that and really kind of make this city and make other people do the advocacy role and make people sign up, and you will feel the benefits in many different ways.
Okay, thank you. Marvin, we had a number of questions about Brexit, and Marvin, I think, covered that fairly extensively in his lecture, and very movingly about the question we had from the young girl about how she felt about the city. But Alex, how are other cities dealing with Brexit at the moment, in terms of the core cities, perhaps?
I think the way that cities are responding, it tends to be three different ways. So the first is they're looking at their economy and they're thinking, all right, how might we be exposed? Where are the sectors that might be most affected by Brexit? What do we need to think about? How do we need to prepare and plan? So that's within the city, and talking to employers and talking to others. Looking to national government, they're thinking about European funds. They're thinking about devolution, and the points that the mayor was making about trying to argue strongly, and I think the core cities are doing this, and other cities are doing this, that Brexit shouldn't be about just centralising power in Whitehall. It's got to be about taking power from Whitehall as well, or from Brussels to local areas. And there is a tendency of civil servants always to grab it, and I think that will be something that calling out time and again and making sure that they live up to the promises they've made about devolution will be really key. The other thing cities are doing is, as the mayor was saying, they're talking to international counterparts. So if you look at somewhere like Nottingham, they've identified 2 sister cities, not twin cities, but sister cities, one of them in China, and they're looking to kind of foster relationships to make sure they're looking for opportunities for investment, trying to kind of make sure they are regarded as open, wanting talent, wanting to remain open to trade and talent. So I think those are the main ways, but I think it's fair to say nobody's quite sure what's going to happen. I think we're not necessarily hugely clearer, even after the party conferences, exactly what the shape of this is going to be. So that uncertainty is the other thing. And that uncertainty can stop things happening. And I think what's really important about what the mayor's said, and for cities, is cities don't stop, because that's where people just live their lives and get on and do their work. So not stopping. And in a way, as Gavin was saying, the power of a mayor is you can shout about things that are nowhere near your remit, because you're the mayor. And so kind of getting on with what you're doing, making sure national government knows it, making sure international cities and investors know about the opportunities here. So getting on wherever you can, I think it is key to this, but there's lots of uncertainty. And so just getting on with what you can do, I think, is the best way.
And Marvin, you attended the first meeting of the Global Parliament of Mayors, and I think you got a big cheer when you said you represented a city that had voted heavily to remain. I mean, what kind of conversations did you have with those international counterparts? I mean, did they look at us with bemusement?
How did you know I got a cheer?
I read about it in the local evening paper, I think.
Right.
So I'm pretty sure I did.
But it's true.
It's true, well, there you are, yeah. I certainly wasn't there, so...
So I'll say two things about that Global Parliament of Mayors. One was interesting, and I think it's important for us, because I'd imagine, I'm assuming, which is dangerous, but I'll make the assumption that many people here would be Remain. But one of the points I made, and I've made at our vigils, is you can't ignore the people that voted to leave, because actually their disgruntlement with the political system is legitimate. They've been left behind, they've been voiceless. I was talking to a couple of people I used to work with at DCLG just yesterday, and I was talking about back in 2005 when I was on something called the National Community Forum, a panel, and I pitched a piece of work which is basically in a very brutal title called The White Poor. And the argument was that the government must find a way of talking to the concerns of poor white people. And it's, Brexit, we've got to be careful with the way we categorize, but there is a piece of that. They must find a way of talking to that without lapsing into the language of the far right. Because if they fail to reach out to those communities, they'll become increasingly marginalized and distant, and they'll be prey to anyone that comes along whispering sweet nothings in the air about £350 million a week going into the NHS, for example, and people taking your houses. And we haven't done that. But their marginalization is real. They have been left behind and left marginalized. It's just that I don't think that the offer that was being put on the table by the Brexit characters is a legitimate offer to solve their challenges. But and I shared that with the GPM. But the other thing that was very interesting about being at the Global Parliament and mayors, again, when we talk about being post-national, that mayors connect with other mayors irrespective of their nationality. We had mayors from Africa, North America, South America, Asia, the rest of Europe, and Mayor Salisbury was there as well, from Leicester, Peter Salisbury. All of those mayors just made a personal connection about looking for their city's interests, which really spiked my kind of interest and my sense of the potential of national government not getting in our way, and how many mayors wanted to do deals, which again spoke to that warning. And when I heard Jacob Rees-Mogg talking about national sovereignty, it was all about the national government. It wasn't about empowering places within that Brexit argument, which struck me as a kind of a contradiction within the heart of that. That recent move.
Okay, thank you very much. We had a specific question which I'll just put to Marvin, but if Alex and Gavin want to comment on this, that would be fine. There was a question particularly about, we have very many talented people who are finding refuge in Bristol, but we're really not, using the talents to the full. One of the examples of, the doctor who has been well trained but has to, work as a taxi driver and so on. I mean, the question was, how can we make best use of these talented people? What your view on that?
Well, and I'll give you a practical example. When I was working for the NHS, myself and a colleague, Mohammed Al-Sharif, who was a Sudanese journalist, his editor was arrested on Friday. He was in the UK on the Sunday. Myself and Mohammed would take senior NHS execs and board members to walk around. We called it walkabouts. We go and visit community-based organisations that people wouldn't normally get to meet. And one day we were with our fantastic chief executive, Deborah Evans, who, in terms of identifying leadership, made a massive investment in my life when I was working for her. We sat with a group of women who were PhDs, engineers, and what have you, medics, but they weren't able to apply their skills in the UK. Now, there's some things that was about how do we make it easier for people to transition their qualifications into the UK? That may be financial, that they have to retrain, and so forth. But there's another fundamental piece around that, which is one that Mohammed talks about a lot. Stop talking about refugees simply as people who come here wanting something, as people in needs. That people are coming here highly skilled, with incredible contributions to make. The fact that there are many and I think one of the things he talks to is that feeds into the mental health and well-being of people who come to this country as well. So, I guess it's something to talk with our universities and so forth, and our national government departments about how we help people transition their skills into a UK context so they can practice. The irony is that I also done a language audit, a language access audit of some of our mental health services. We've got all these people coming over, and we have a problem with getting access to interpretation services. If we could join those two things up, it could. But I mean, I know that sounds very easy and simplistic, but in some things are.
Okay. Well, I'll leave that with that. But that was we had many questions about housing, and Gavin has already talked about that. But I want to bring all panel members into this. And First of all, Gavin, just fill us in a little more about the major problems about, you've been doing work about generation rent and so on. I mean, what, some headline issues there.
Oh God, you're going to ask me to really depress everyone now, aren't you?
No,
it's not a happy story. I'll try and... well, I mean, I think we're still, even people who are kind of familiar with this debate, and we've all seen it to some degree on the news, are still struggling to come to terms with quite what has happened across the different generations in this country over the relatively recent past. So what do I mean by that? I mean, it's the case today that people, millennials, as they're sometimes annoyingly called, but basically people in their kind of 20s, early 30s, have taken a leap back in terms of their pay prospects. You have to go back 20 years to, God help them, people like me, to find their sort of earnings that they are actually on today. So they're basically missed out on 20 years of progress. So each cohort usually expects to see themselves, kind of supersede the people before them, and that's not happened anymore. And that we're still figuring out what that's going to mean. It's going to mean all sorts of things about how people live, when they have kids, the sorts of pensions they're going to have. Obviously, we'll be living with the unravelling of this for decades and decades to come. But it's one very concrete form it takes is that you're just dramatically less likely to own a home in your 20s or the first half of your 30s now. I mean, kind of 70% less likely than someone who's like me in your mid-40s when I was at that age. That's a massive social shift in this country, a country like more than most countries where there is a social attachment to home ownership, and it gives people a sense of sort of meaning and identity more so than in some other countries. So that's a massive deal. And this generation is going to be working a lot longer. And that's something we know, but we're still coming to terms with. And my prediction will be they'll be working even longer than we currently think we will be, well into their 70s. And they are going to face a lot less support when they have kids than the last generation did, Generation X, if you like. And so these are really big shifts in how a generation is going to, the social contract that a generation is having with the state and with other generations. And that's not a very happy story. I mean, the thing which, if a chink of light, because I need a chink of light on that has grabbed me recently is I've been looking at shifts in public attitudes since 2010 on some issues, not just amongst younger people who are on the end of this, but amongst baby boomers there are a lot of poor baby boomers, before I sort of generalise, but who have generally speaking had a better deal relative to other generations over recent years, I feel confident saying. And I have been struck by the dramatic shift, and it is dramatic if you're familiar with kind of how public attitude often doesn't change on some things, but there's been a dramatic shift in attitudes towards building homes in your community. And I didn't expect that. I mean, it's taken my breath away. I mean, like massive shifts, including amongst the young, but that doesn't surprise me, for obvious reasons, but amongst kind of 50 to 70-year-olds, way beyond what any of us would have expected. And I actually think the politicians are lagging the public in their reading of that mood. And I don't mean, therefore, there's no public resistance. There's lots of public resistance in lots of places to building homes. But I actually think it's a bit like, I was very involved, it's a completely different issue, but the smoking ban was something which the public smoking ban, spent years on. And we were terrified in government. I used to work at Whitehall, and we were terrified in Downing Street about the public were going to kill us because there's just, people won't tolerate a big shift, a legal shift. And it turns out we changed the law and we banned smoking in pubs and so on. No one blinked. I mean, we were like 10 years behind. And I kind of think, I'm not sure we're 10 years behind in housing, but I think there's been a fundamental shift, and it's a shift which would benefit the people who have lost the most. So there are some chinks of light.
Alex, this must be a problem around the country, but is anybody got any creative solutions?
I mean, it is a problem around the country. I agree with Gavin that actually, as I've been going around the country talking to places, and some of them full of NIMBYs, to use a term, and lots of greenbelt and facing real challenges, there's been a big shift because actually people are realising their kids can't own homes, they can't rent nice homes, that actually this holds them back in terms of lots of life decisions. And I think the impact of that just briefly on this, is much more than often people think about. So this is not just about individual lives, which is huge, or the choices they make for their families. This affects things like hospitals, where actually, because porters in hospitals don't earn very much, and often they can't afford to live anywhere near a hospital. And so they travel a very, very long way, and often turnover. Now, London is one of the worst examples for this. Turnover is very, very high because they can't take that incredibly long journey to do a very kind of physically demanding job. So you're constantly retraining and retraining the porters, the cleaners, the people who do some of the key work. And that creates problems around hygiene. That creates problems around how a hospital works. So we already know that housing affects mental and physical health. We know it affects whole families. We know it has big impacts. But, this has impacts on things that go beyond housing. And I think a point I would make is the places that are best at this around the country, places like Milton Keynes are interesting. It's easier for them because they've got lots of land. What they have done really well is realise that housing is not just about lots of new homes. It is about GP surgeries and schools and parks and talking to the people who live there, who many of them understandably say, I don't want new homes if I don't get to see my GP, if I don't get my kid to a good school, if I don't get to be able to go to the park. So a home, and I think you said this very explicitly, it's not just a house, it's a home. But I think it's more than a home, it is the community. And Milton Keynes built lots of the infrastructure that you need around a community, and they actually have below average house prices for the southeast, which is quite a thing for the south, below average, and have kept that despite their population growing year on year on year, because housing supply has kept pace. So I think taking that approach, now that does mean lots of things about financing infrastructure, because one of the biggest barriers to housing, some of it's getting the money. But actually, when you talk to the experts, there's lots of things about making sure you've got the utilities and the electrics and the waste and the sewers and the roads and all the things that make things work. But actually, there's money out there. Some of this is about the leadership, and it's bringing people together, public and private, community and national, to say, this is what we want, this is how we're going to deliver it. And there is money out there, particularly for a city like this, that I think you could use to unlock it. So I think there are messages of hope in this. I don't underestimate how hard it is or the challenge you've got, because clearly Bristol is a city that goes well beyond its boundaries in terms of the way the economy works, and working with neighbours will be key to making sure you really tackle these challenges.
Thank you. Marvin, you've committed to 2,000 houses. How much beyond that do you think we need to go?
Oops. We have a housing crisis in the city. When we were setting out, and one of my first appointment was Paul Smith, who's just said, Paul, just go out and get us houses built, right? And he's going out, he's talking to our housing associations that we were meeting before the election, on the quiet, obviously, because they don't want to compromise themselves politically, but we were talking to investors and people who wanted to make things happen in Bristol, and we've given Paul license to do that. When we come up with 2,000 a year by 2020, at least 800 affordable. There are a number of things in that. One, we know it's a stretch, but there's no point making a commitment if it's not a stretch for the city. We know it's not enough. We know we need at least, we said we want at least 800 of those to be affordable and real affordability. We know we need a mix of 10 years, some for sale, some for rent. We want to support our housing associations, obviously, to be in there. So we know we need to go beyond. And we also know that we need to build our capacity over the coming years as well, which is why we've said by 2020, our skills base, making our land available, getting the finance. We can't just switch a switch and have the supply come out. So I'll be frank, it's one of those things that gives me my anxiety moments at home. When I'm at home, we made the commitment. But like I said, we made the commitment. We part of it was, interestingly, meeting some of the housing experts we did before the election, was they were saying to us, you need to send a signal in Bristol. The signals we've had are not being signals to say that you really want to get houses built. So send a signal. So that's what we did. Here's political leadership. Here's the aspiration. The political leader in the cabinet has the power to go out and get things done. This is the go. Let's make it happen. And what we've had is people coming in. I had a chief exec of one of our housing associations meet me just the other morning. We were at a breakfast on homelessness in Bristol, and she said to me, "We've just upped the number." Which she said, on the basis of your commitment on housing, we are pledging to build 500 homes in Bristol by 2020. We weren't gonna pledge to build 500. That's a stretch for us, but we're gonna make that pledge. And so I think that positivity and that intention has obviously attracted the positivity and attention. But I make no bones about it. I think it's going to be a challenge. But, like I said, we set our stall out and that's what we want to try and do.
Okay, thank you. We had many questions about environmental policy and changes and sustainability issues. We can't go through them all, but just for Marvin, really, about commitments to low carbon cities, low emission city and so on. What's your current thinking on this?
Well, there's a context to it. And if any of you follow Twitter, there's been a bit of a thing recently. It's simply that my point is that when we talk about environmental justice and environmental sustainability, we have to do it in tandem with social justice and social sustainability. There's a thing that I think that we perhaps haven't necessarily taken fully into account in Bristol, is that we have to, I think sometimes to talk about existential threats to humanity, we have to give people the economic and emotional space to care about that stuff, beyond just trying to put food on the table tomorrow. And again, I think that in some sense, the inequalities we face will undermine our ability to deliver an environmental movement with the political power at scale we need to get real things done. And I think, actually, I also think it's quite cheeky to go up to people and ask them to take on a big agenda without taking account of their agenda. I'm just trying to feed my kids tomorrow type thing. But in terms of what we want to do in Bristol, at the political level, our commitment is there. One is, I think it's a matter of clear social and racial justice. The people who get hit first and hardest by the results of the destruction of the environment look like me and my dad, and they come from poor backgrounds. It's an issue of poverty. So if we are taking poverty and inequality seriously, we have to take our sustainable development seriously, both for local in terms of air quality and the immediate environment, people living around clean streets, both too, whether we've got environmental issues driving migration, creating political instability that ends up on our streets as well, or people just dying because their land is subject to desertification. They migrate to the cities, you end up in the shanty towns and so forth. So we absolutely see that connection. We know we need to continue to work on insulating homes in Bristol. Something was spoken to me about that vision of having all our public transport system running on clean energy. I've since had a conversation with the C40 partnership, which is very interested, and asked them if they would, we're not a member yet, but I've asked them if they would help us in terms of integrating into that city plan, that it is a plan to take us towards sustainability so that we are not killing the planet in the way that we develop. And it's one of the reasons, actually, I often talk about economic development rather than economic growth. I'm not saying I'm not anti-growth, but I just think that development to me is a bit more of a nuanced term in terms of what we need to do, because we're not saying growth at any cost. There is such a thing as bad growth that destroys life and destroys the planet. Why would you even pursue that? So I want to see that around our buses. We've explored the potential of supporting our taxi drivers to all transition over to clean energy as well. If I just say on the other end of the spectrum, we're appointing, I'm going to have in my office very soon, a single person to lead on a clean streets campaign for Bristol. It's about fly tipping, it's about litter. One of the points made to me when I was in New York from the 100 Resilient Cities, the Rockefeller Group, was you can tell a lot about a people by the nature of their relationship with waste. If we're dropping litter on the streets, if we're getting fly tipping, that says something about the health of a place. And so we want, Kurt James is his name, you'll hear about him. What he wants to do is get involved in how we work with Bristol Waste, Bristol Energy, but how we also feed over into how we deal with behaviour change around keeping our city clean. Because as a city council working alone, we cannot afford to keep going around picking up litter.
Okay, thank you. We had questions about devolution and the voting system. I wanted, Alex, first of all, this is a big subject you're involved in all the time. We're about to go into possibly an election in the west of England for an elected mayor and devolution. What do you think of the advantages we'll have as Bristol and as a wider conurbation area for us on this?
I think what you'll get with the West of England mayor is some extra budget, some extra money. You'll get some powers over transport, over strategic planning. So you'll get some additional powers, a little bit of extra money over an area that actually, if you look at where the economy works, it doesn't just work within Bristol's boundaries. It very much extends beyond. So I think a chance to work together on some of the big strategic issues beyond boundaries. But I think more than that, this is the best chance, the only chance, frankly, that the government is giving to give some of these powers away. If the West of England doesn't go for this, then these are powers that will not come anywhere near Bristol. They will stay in Whitehall. So there are all sorts of things you can say about whether the devolution deal, and it's just Mark 1, is right, is enough. But actually, I think it will work for Bristol because it's extra money, it's extra powers, and it's extra decisions that can be taken locally. And it's a way into more deals. I know, having spoken to the Mayor about this before, you very much see this as the start of a set of deals. And so it should be. Manchester is on its 4th deal now. That's open to the West of England. And as you've got a figure shouting nationally alongside the Mayor of Bristol about what needs to be done here, about what its potential is, and shouting on the international stage, because this isn't just about national government, nor should it be. It's about the people here, it's about businesses everywhere, it's about international profile. It means you have better chances of getting better decisions made. So I think a bit more money, a bit more power, nowhere near enough, but it's the only way to get a really good start on it. And I think some of the issues, like greater control over some of the tax that's raised in this city, to be able to reinvest it back into this city, to do things that you want to achieve, those are things that are only on the agenda with this West of England mayor. So I think that there's a lot of potential for it, to get it to work. Talking about it locally, talking about what you want to do and where you want to see it go will be crucial.
Gavin?
I totally endorse that. I just want to kind of, again, amplify that in one way, which is that the fiscal situation for this city and other cities, given the national fiscal situation, I see no scenario in which it gets better. I see lots of scenarios where it gets worse. And I think this discussion about devolution of powers is absolutely central to that, because the only way in which, so I'm a big believer in cities having a broader set of taxes on which they could draw to grow their economy. I don't see any chance of that happening out with there being a city region mayor, and other places are going to do this. The world is not going to stand still. It is going to happen. Obviously Manchester's there, but more places will do this. So given the broader fiscal outlook for kind of the country, I honestly I'd be really worried if you didn't go for this, but I'm not from here, so who am I?
Okay, but Marvin, you made clear that you see this as just the beginning of devolution of powers, and there'll be Mark IIs and so on, and Mark IIIs.
Yeah, and that's the way we talked about it in the council chamber when we debated it, that it is not just devolution deal 1, it is the gateway to 2, 3 and 4, and an investment journey. I mean, that speaks to me. I actually think national government set this thing up badly. No, I'm not having a crack at them in that sense, but I just think it was unwise that by asking us to take on a metro mayor, the whole debate became around a political position and a new layer of administration and bureaucracy and all that sort of stuff. I think they would have been better to have said to us, because what's really being asked of is that we evidence the ability to be grown up in the way we lead our place, that we can work across our boundaries and our sectoral boundaries and organizational boundaries. We can identify shared priorities for the region, and on the basis and on the basis of that, run the place well. I think they would have been better to have said, evidence that to us, tell us what kind of structure you'd put in place to support that behaviour and that culture, and then we'll negotiate with you over the structure that you're proposing to us, rather than saying, here's a metro mayor, because then the whole debate came around a metro mayor. Anyway, that didn't happen. But I think, like I said, what we said is, a metro mayor is the price worth paying. Even if you're opposed to it, it's a price worth paying, because if we miss out on that gateway to go in that investment journey, we'll be increasingly relegated to some parish council. We'll miss out on the delegated powers. We'll miss out on the extra resources. And by human nature, I think government would probably punish us by saying, well, we're going to deal with the people that did do what we wanted, and we're going to put you can call up next week and talk to us.
Okay, one of the great things about being in the Great Hall is you get a reminder with the bells going that we're at a final thing. So this is the final question. It's just one sentence each. We were asked, what does success mean? So I'll go along the line. Gavin, you're watching from outside. Alex, you're watching from outside. What do you think success will mean for Marvin as mayor?
It means that the prosperity of a city is matched by a kind of full-out assault on social inequality, which is ingrained within this city. And if you pull that off, not least in schools, but beyond schools, then we'll all be back singing your praises in a few years' time.
Okay, Alex?
Exactly. I mean, I completely endorse that. It's got to be that. And I think it's a prosperity that keeps moving. So Bristol is one of those cities that does reinvent itself, that does adapt to a kind of a changing world. I think it needs to get better at adapting within the city, making sure everybody takes part in that. But so prosperity that works for, well, a city that works for all, I've heard.
And Marvin, you how your legacy in one sentence you would hope we
Can I have 1.5 sentences?
1.5 sentences, yeah.
So I think there's two faces to this. One is it has to be a city that works for everyone, both within the city boundary. But I never want it to be lost that actually we have an international responsibility, both in terms of global economic justice and global climate justice as well. So the way we develop has to work for everyone in Bristol, but we have to be making a positive contribution, setting a standard and delivering on the global stage.
Okay. We've managed to get through 7 of the 70 questions we were sent. I know that the team in the City Council will look at those questions and try and answer as many as possible in other forms, so we will be in touch with you. Just to finish things off, thank you so much to the University of Bristol for hosting us tonight, to the staff in Bristol City Council who've given huge support, particularly to Hannah Sturman and Kevin Slocum, to my team in the Festival of Ideas and the volunteers who have worked with us tonight. To you, the audience, thank you so much for coming for this 4th Mayor's Lecture and turning out in such a tremendous force for this. And finally, to all our speakers, from Hugh to Reverend Gilles, to Miles Chambers, and congratulations again, Miles, on being the city poet. He's got quite a lot of poems to write for us, so he's we'll see, we'll have him every time. And to Gavin, Alexandra Jones, and Mayor Marvin Rees. Thank you very much.